Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're privileged to have with us John Finch, who is the creator and storyteller of The Father Effect. Welcome to the program, John.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit of your background and what led you to create this project called The Father Effect, and what is the project, The Father Effect?
Well, my story is one that when I was 11 years old, my dad committed suicide, and so I grew up as a fatherless boy, if you will, from that time on, and not having that father walk alongside me and be there to affirm me and confirm me and do all the things that a father does. I had bought into everything that the world says you should be as a boy and even a young man. And so for 30 years, I really was lost, searching for, again, that my identity and what it looked like to be a real man. And so, I bought into the world's lies of success, money, power, all of those things, because, that's essentially what TV and movies and other things tell us. And it proved to be a very difficult life. And about 6 or 7 years ago, God kind of took me to this place of brokenness, and my family was falling apart, and my behavior as a social alcoholic was really starting to just impact every aspect of my life, and God got my attention. Yeah, I like to tell people he slapped me upside the face. And yeah, he did, and it was on that day, it was February 20th of 2009, that I first totally surrendered to God, and what I believe is the true salvation of for me. And I said, I'm all in, and I really needed to look into this issue I had with my dad and the abandonment that I suffered. So as I began to share my story, I found out there were literally everybody that I talked to had a father story and a father wound, if you will, to some degree. So as I began to tell my story, I saw the massive epidemic that the issue is of absent fathers and the father wound.
And what would then be your first step, and what did you do? Because from what I would suspect, you then started healing those things and mending those bridges before you could even think about looking outside to help others with the same issue.
Sure. And so, that day, February 20th, I had talked with a friend of mine who was a counselor, and began a once a week appointment with him to just have those conversations and try to figure this thing out. I tell people he was my Aaron to Moses, because there's no way I could have made it through this and probably be where I'm at today without him. I needed a guide to help me understand this issue, the thing that I was struggling with. So I went to him for about 3 months, and it was in one of those appointments that God just literally made it very clear to me. He said, John, how can you be so bitter, resentful, and angry towards a man who didn't know how to be a father? And it was in that moment that literally God showed me forgiveness for my dad, and that's what radically changed my life as a man, husband, father.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it's kind of like when someone says, I'm 30 pounds overweight, I need to go on a diet, when can I lose the 30 pounds? Next week. And it took you years and years to put it on, so it might not take you years and years to take it off, but it's not going to be a week either. It's not going to be like pulling the Band-Aid off. So I would suspect that you kind of were stumbling along the way and figuring this piece out and figuring that piece out, and it wasn't an overnight process of restoration.
You know what? I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yep.
I can honestly say that day I walked out of the counselor's office, it was as if I had been walking around for 30 years with this just dirty, filthy, cracked pair of glasses. And it was like God gave me a new pair of glasses. That the sky was bluer, the grass was greener, and it was in that moment that He really started me on this journey. And a key part of me finding forgiveness from my dad was just the compassion that God showed me for my father once I really began to understand his story and the fact that he grew up without a father and, all the things that he struggled with. And so, for many men, I don't know that they connect the dots there. And women, too. This father wound thing is not just for men. I mean, we've interviewed many women who were very impacted by their dads in a good and a bad way. And, we say in the film, 9 out of 10 people have a father wound. That's the statistics on a study that we found back in 2007. Well, we got to interview John Eldredge, the best-selling author of Wild at
Bringing
Heart.
Up Boys. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he would argue that it's 10 out of 10, that everybody carries some type of wound because we as dad are not perfect. I've wounded my kids, and I continue to do so. I think that I wound them less because of the awareness that I now walk in.
Sure.
But it's just part of life. It's part of who we are and the imperfection that we have.
Yeah, I think that's and when you can say, I still don't have it figured out, that transparency lets people know that, I'm not lording my knowledge over people and telling you thou shalt follow what I did because it worked for me. It means you're just a couple, 3 steps further down the path that they are. So maybe you can kind of learn as you go.
Absolutely. No one has this father thing figured out. As a dad myself, I continue to mess up all the time. And there's things I've learned in that, and that's been able to make me a better and stronger dad. We interviewed over 80+ people for the film, and it was in literally every interview that God was showing me something about myself or something that He could help me do better. And there were things that I was taking away from those interviews and going back and implementing in my own home and ultimately helping me change my legacy as a dad.
So that led you to the project, which is a film, correct?
Correct.
And how did that come about? Because maybe if you're not have a background on film, it's probably not the easiest thing to do. So how did you conceive that idea and then start assembling that team? And then what is the film project about?
Well, so essentially I had walked away from my corporate sales gig. I'd been a traveling salesman for over 20 years, and God had just laid it upon my heart to get this message out. And the first 6 months we were really struggling in trying to get the message out. And I was doing a lot of writing, and one day, God just kind of confirmed, John, you've got to make a film. I think especially men, I don't know. I know me personally, I'm not a big reader. I'd rather sit and watch a video than read a book. And so I think most men are probably that way. And so literally I just said, okay, and started talking to some various people and had some mentors that kind of just spoke into my life and encouraged me. So I went and got a good camera and got on the internet and Googled, how to make a film and what are the key important things, and literally just started talking to people and spreading the word that this is what we were doing. We were making a documentary, and we've been very, very blessed. We did a 15-minute short film that we released on Father's Day of 2014. And we just finished the full-length film. So we are actually in the process of looking for distribution and talking to several groups now about getting the full-length out. The film itself is one that just shares my story of growing up without a father and the struggles that entails. And then also those great messages and lessons that I learned through the people that we interviewed. And even the last 5 or 6 years, kind of how God's showed me things that I can do differently and things about myself that's helped to change my legacy. And so we share that. It's a very inspiring, encouraging film, but it's one that addresses the real issues of a young man growing up without a father.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty unique because you see a lot of films on car chases or war or whatever the case is, but this is one that you do feel like you can pull a life lesson out of. Is it in the line of a documentary where you interviewed experts as well?
Yes, so it is a documentary, and we interviewed. We interviewed experts. We interviewed ordinary people. As I mentioned, we got John Eldredge. We interviewed Dr. Meg Meeker, who has been on the Today Show and does several things with Dave Ramsey, and Dr. James Dobson, and we interviewed everybody from a rabbi to a UFC champion to a multimillionaire to just everyday ordinary folks, and they were powerful stories. It's in those stories, in every story, that someone can identify.
Yeah.
With something within that story that makes them say, "Wow, that's me." That I grew up just like that, and so again, that story of encouragement and hope, and believe me, if I can make it through this thing, if I can do my best to be a better father, and with all the mistakes and everything else I've made, then anybody can do it. And so that's kind of the message of a hope and encouragement is part of what we do as dads on a daily basis has a significant lifelong impact on our kids. And so we want to encourage dads to just walk in that daily awareness of their impact. And in that, it changes their life and their relationships with their kids and their wife.
Yeah, I think that people hear that so many times and they nod their head and say, I get that, I understand, and I agree. But then it's kind of like when you go to a business conference and you learn all these things and then you go back to work and then there's the emails and the phone calls and the appointments and it's just like the notes get shoved under the table. And so what I would wonder is there something that you would say, here's something that's kind of like the glue that would allow you to hear and implement some of these things? Because, we can wound our kids, and I've got 4 kids, 12 to 18. So, sometimes you can just say something off the cuff and in the heat of the moment, and not even argument heat, but just sometimes you're in the middle of 9 projects and someone makes a loud clang in the other room and you could handle it a whole lot better. So if you could step back and count to 5 and then speak, but any tips that way to go, here's how you can keep things front and center to make sure that you are encouraging, not wounding?
Well, there's so many lessons. The most difficult part about doing the full-length film was trying to figure out what messages and lessons to leave out, because there's just so much that I learned. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest things I learned was just being real with your kids, being very authentic and transparent and honest with your kids. A perfect example is, we interviewed Dr. Meg Meeker, and she's a pediatrician by trade and a best-selling author. And she did, in this conversation, she talked about the importance of when we lose our temper or make a mistake with our kids, how we should go and have the conversation with them and apologize and literally ask them for forgiveness, because it's in that conversation there's an intimacy between you and your child that's unlike anything else, and they see that you're not perfect, and then they understand and know they don't have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. And so, when I mess up with my kids now, and I still do, I'll go upstairs and have a conversation with them one-on-one and just walk them through that. And I say, look, I apologize. Dad's having a bad day or whatever the reason is. Maybe I said something I shouldn't have. And then I ask them for forgiveness. And so it leads to these great conversations with our kids. But most importantly, the overall message is, for me, is just be real with your kids and be honest and share your struggles in life even. And don't be afraid to cry. There's this crazy lie and myth of this world that we can't be real as men, we can't cry. And, as young men, as young boys, we're taught very early on the soccer field, the football field, and baseball field, suck it up. If you fall down or whatever, suck it up, be a man. And so from a very early age, we're taught we can't be real. And so that's the biggest thing, because then those young men grow up, and again, they've got it in their mind that they can't be real and show real emotion, because it's just not what the world says we should do.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and I think that's something that, if you, at some point, if you're seeing yourself and feeling yourself making things right, at some point it's going to seep in, and you're going to kind of back up one step and help to prevent it from happening again, because it's like, I don't want to go to my kids and say I messed up again.
Sure. Yeah. You know what? And I've had those conversations many a times, and for me with my girls, it's strengthened our relationship significantly, because they understand Dad's doing the very best he can. They know my story. They know I didn't have a dad. And so, I think they give me a little leniency because of that. And they know we're just kind of traveling this journey together and learning together. And again, I'm going to make mistakes, but you know what? I love them. I care about them, and I'm doing the very best I can.
Yep. Love it. So can you think of like a story that stands out from one of your interviews from the film that might be interesting to recount?
Sure, absolutely. We had so many. The one, well, we've got a couple I'll share real quick. One of the other ones with Dr. Meeker was that because she's a pediatrician by trade, she sees a lot of young girls, and with me having 3 daughters, this was a very, very much a wow moment for me. She shared a story with me. She said, John, more than once I've had a little 13 or 14-year-old girl come in my office, and they were sexually active at that age. And we would go through the checkup, and before they left, they would say, hey, can you write me a prescription? And Dr. Meeker would say, you're totally fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And the little girl would say, you know what? I don't care what the prescription's for. Just at the bottom, put cannot have sex. And she said, John, what was happening was these young girls were not getting any kind of positive affection or attention from their fathers or from a fatherly figure. They were having sex. It wasn't physically or emotionally pleasurable, but it was the only affection and attention they were getting. And so they were doing anything to get the attention of any man, even a young boy. So this prescription was their permission slip to take to Johnny to say, Johnny, look, I can't have sex anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, in that moment as a father of girls, you just kind of go, wow, I've got to make sure that I'm showing positive love, affection, and attention to my girls so that they don't go look for that somewhere else, because they will. If they're not getting it at home, they're going to go look for it somewhere else. And most of the time, that's some type of sexual activity with another young man.
Yeah, and it's interesting that story is that young lady crying out for help and assistance. And it's kind of like growing up, I'm sure that we all know people that had the parents that let them do anything and everything, and you're going, man, my parents have all these rules and I'm stifled. And sometimes you hear that the kids that had all the rules would say, I wish I had the rules, because it shows that your parents care about you, and I kind of almost think my parents don't even, care or worry about me. And so I think it goes both ways. You look at it like, it's so free, but they look at you going, wow, there's love and affection because they do care about you and set these restrictions on you.
Yeah, and there's a happy medium, I believe. I think the biggest mistake some of us make is if our fathers or our families or parents were very, very strict, they go the exact opposite and are very lenient, and vice versa. So I think there's a happy medium, in that. And it's important, again, to be able to have those conversations with your kids and just be very honest and open with them. One of the other individuals we had the opportunity to interview was Neil Jeffrey. He's a former All-American at Baylor University, and he was a backup quarterback and San Diego Chargers for Dan Fouts. And he'll claim that, Dan Fouts was as good as he was because of him as a backup quarterback. So he's a great guy and just loves encouraging and speaking into men's lives. And he told me about his dad being a prayer warrior and just how his dad would just pray for him before and after the games and with him. And even when his dad wasn't there, he'd write him a little note and said, "Hey, just wanted you to know that I mentioned you to the Father this morning. Love, Daddy-o." And he said, "John, that there's nothing like a child hearing his father pray for her or him out loud by name in that manly, fatherly voice." And for me, that was a big thing because up until that point, I was kind of that dad that just, would say this great general prayer every night with my kid, and patted myself on the back walking out of the room. Go, wow, that was pretty good. So I that night, literally from the interview that day, I went home and I told my wife, I said, "You know what, tonight things are going to change." And so now I ask my girls when I'm home and not traveling, I ask each one of them, "What can I pray for you about?" And that, again, has been such a huge thing in the relationship with my girls because they see that Dad is honestly and genuinely concerned about their life, whether it's a test that they're struggling with, they're nervous about, whatever it might be. The cool thing about is even after the fact, even after we pray, I can then have those further conversations. Well, why are you worried about this test? How can I help you? So again, it leads to even a greater intimacy, and they see the concern and the heart that I have as a father. So that's been a huge, huge lesson for me and something that I've been able to implement.
Nice. That is awesome. So let's wrap up with telling us how people can view your short film, and then how can they learn more about other projects that you have planned.
Sure. We have a website called thefathereffect.com. We're also on social media, on Twitter @thefathereffect. We have a YouTube channel, just The Father Effect Movie. We're on Facebook too with The Father Effect Movie. And if you go on our website, you can learn about some of the other projects. We're currently doing an Encouraging Dads project, which, in the film, what I learned was there's so many of us as dads that just feel beat down and like we're not doing a good enough job. And this particular project is short stories from bloggers, authors, and writers from all over the world that just encourage dads, that just share stories of encouragement and just really support fathers. And I think that's so important because, again, there's so many of us out there that struggle with feeling that we're good enough or doing a good enough job. So we are doing that. We're also starting to work on our second documentary, The Father Effect 2, which deals very much with raising girls and the difficulties that lie in that. And so we're helping men navigate that journey, whether it be, the girl that's struggling because she only sees her worth or value in the number of likes she gets on Instagram. The world is just bombarding our young girls with sexual images and the hypersexuality. And there's just so many things that me with 3 daughters, we are dealing with it and have dealt with just about everything. So we're going to kind of walk through that journey and interview experts and really help dads become better in those relationships with the girls.
Nice. I made a note here in my schedule to go and watch that myself because I have 3 daughters and a son, so I think that will be excellent for me. So I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful getting to know you, and wish you all the best in getting your distribution in your main film.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate the time, man, and thanks again for having me.
You're so welcome, John. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.